Welcome to The Uniformer. Insights into and interviews with the people and companies that drive the markets for uniforms, image apparel, public safety, and workwear.
Hello, welcome to The Uniformer Live. We were pleased today. I'm Rick Levine from the NAUMD and pleased here to be with Chad. Chad, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Rick. Great to see you again, by the way. And my name is Chad Bolick. I am with CiCLO Technology. It's a collaboration joint venture of Intrinsic Advanced Materials and Parkdale Advanced Materials. But happy to be here. Look forward to talking with you today.
Excellent. Yeah, me too, because this is a challenging topic because, you know, we either, as individuals in this industry, we either have this kind of science-y brain or we don't have this science-y brain. And so some of this, and I appreciate your expertise on this because you have a background in all of the textile development and the chemicals and all of that. So for those that are completely unfamiliar with CiCLO, though, why don't you give us like a background of, or the one pager on
Sure.
what it is and maybe what what it's solving or trying to solve.
Absolutely. So, CiCLO, it's interesting. Textiles, obviously one of the biggest issues in textiles today is textile waste. And that waste getting in the environment, getting in our landfills, polluting our the planet. And CiCLO really was born out of that. And what we're trying to do in our technology, so we are an additive technology that blends with polyester, nylon, polypropylene. And what we do is we enable that synthetic textile, that synthetic fiber or yarn to biodegrade. And we do that. I'll get into that in a little bit. But really what we're trying to do is address that microplastic leakage that happens in the environment. Today, textile to textile, and people are wanting to recycle their textiles, and that's great. We 100% support that, and we work very well with that. But there is unintended leakage that happens in the environment during the manufacturing process, during the life of the garments, and at the end of life of garment. And those microplastics that get into the environment, you don't want them to persist in the environment. So what we're doing is we enable them to biodegrade. Instead of spending decades in the environment, they're going to spend, in a polyester world, they're going to be less than 4 years. They're going to be able to biodegrade back to the natural elements.
So there's a few things in there. Let me see if I'm saying it back to you correctly. So there's the two rails. One is this biodegradability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try saying that 10 times fast. And then the other is, and I've heard it referred this way. I don't know if this term is correct because you didn't use it, but a shedding. It's almost like you're calling it leakage, but it's a little bit like if I rub a sleeve, there's microfibers or actual fibers that are basically floating around then in the air. And those can have this PFAS element, if you will, right? Or this plastic element to it. Am I saying it back correctly? Like those are the two rails?
Yeah, well, they're actually one rail. When you really think about it, the shedding, that's the actual what's happening with the textile. The textile itself, if you think the easiest one for people to visualize is fleece. When you have a fleece garment and you wear it, you take it off. If you're wearing a black fleece jacket and you're wearing a white shirt, you take it off. You always have these little fibers that are on your shirt. That's the shedding that happens. Now that happens during the manufacturing of that fleece because you have to actually shear that fleece to create the fleece itself. And then as I just discussed, it will happen during the life of that garment, either during the wearing or the washing or whatever. The term leakage, what I do is, anytime a leak is a bad thing. You don't want, anytime, we hear about, I have a leak in a pipe, it's an issue. So the term we use as leakage is because those fibers that shed off the garment, they can't be captured. Now there are filters that can be used and things like that, but a lot of them leak into the environment. So they end up leaking into the environment. And when they leak into the environment, they're going to persist in the environment for decades unless they have a technology like CiCLO that allows them to biodegrade much quicker.
And the much quicker is the key phrase, because everything, quote unquote, is biodegradable. All matter becomes something else over long periods of time, right? But the goal here is you're saying we want to greatly reduce by a magnitude of 10, call it, the amount of time that potentially can take.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Rick, if you think about it, polyester, let's just say that can take hundreds of years to biodegrade. Where instead of standard polyester, instead of something staying in the environment for hundreds of years, what we're wanting it to do is biodegrade in under 4. So yeah, you were drastically reducing the amount of time that those microplastics stay in the environment. One of the key facts that I'd seen, that 35% of the microplastics in the sea today, in oceans today, come from synthetic textiles.
Oh, so, not from plastic water vessels.
Not from plastic water bottles, not from things like that. That 35% of those of the microplastics come from textiles. And if we can have an additive that allows those textiles to quickly biodegrade or more quickly biodegrade, then that number is going to reduce. And that's what we want to do.
How do we know if it works?
Oh, well, scientific, that's a good question. And one of the things that CiCLO does, and I think it has set us apart from competitors and other technologies in the market, is all of our data is based on scientific testing. And we have hundreds of tests, and whether that's in all different environments, that could be landfill, that could be wastewater sludge, that could be seawater, that could be your soil. And we test the garments, we test yarn, we test fiber against industry standard test methods. And those test methods are they could be ASTM test methods or ISO test methods. And you actually run it to full completion. So these tests are not accelerated. You're literally, our tests stay in the labs for, if I say that something takes 3.5 years to biodegrade, it has been in that lab for 3.5 years going through testing. So really, if you're looking at technologies and things like this and brands, really you've got to be able to say what's the validation method?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and you mentioned it, and I guess I'm a textile nerd at heart. Something that I've geeked out in since birth. My family was in textiles, so
wow.
I grew up as a lint head. So it was one of those things, and you have to have test methods to test things, and you have to use accredited labs, and you have to use industry standard test methods to say, does this work? Another thing that CiCLO did that's pretty interesting, we went through a 4-year study with a lady that was the former head of bioscience for Intertech Labs in Mumbai. And she looked not only at the validity of the test that were being used, she also looked at what was going on during that biodegradation process. So one of the big questions that we always have is around, are you creating a toxic environment? Anything like that. And what she found is that there are no toxic environments being created. There's no ecosystem disruption. There's no phytotoxicity. There's no aquatic toxicity. She's looking both at earthworm toxicity, all these things, and there was never any area where she found toxic environments. So the technology is safe. The way that the biodegradation process works is just like how a natural fiber biodegrades. We're enabling that synthetic textile to biodegrade at a quicker rate when it reaches an environment, an end of life environment where that biodegradation is capable of happening.
Why? Okay, here's a very maybe naive isn't the right word, but I don't know a lot about the chemical process. Why is it that polyester is so hard to deform, to degrade, to like? Isn't it oil, or isn't this just a petroleum product? I mean,
it is, but it's actually a complex structure. So those bonds that are in the structure itself, it's complex. It's harder to break down. And then what CiCLO does, we are an additive that goes in during that manufacturing process of polyester. So during the extrusion process of that synthetic fiber, we're added. And what we're embedded into the structure of that polymer then at that point. And we're active ingredients, and we're, those active ingredients that we put into the polymer structure then act as a nutrient for the microorganisms that in the environment that the textile will end up in at end of life.
Ah, okay. So you're exciting the dudes that will eat up the polyester. Am I saying it?
Yeah. We're saying, hey, come and
feast.
We've got an easier path for you to break this down now. So
yeah. Okay. Now there's other ways, right? Like I've talked with I'm going to use the word destructionists, but it's not really. So there's companies that are involved in our NAUMD network, that will destroy. So they will shred the textiles and put it into a punching bag, let's say, or they will burn it up and will create energy out of it. But I guess, having talked with you in the past, that's more of like, okay, those are last resort ones. And I'm putting words in your mouth. Ideally, we want methods that go to what you mentioned at the onset, which is this textile to textile approach. So how do we rate or seek, especially when we're talking to end users, and I know I'm throwing way too much at you at once. How do we seek the most appropriate path for our uniform customers, for our end users?
And it's a good question. That's probably one of the tougher questions to answer, because there's not one path, unfortunately. When you look at the issue of textile waste entering our landfills, entering our environment, there's not one answer. And I think that's one thing that I want to convey to everyone, because we see that with a lot of brands and retailers now. They're looking at one direction to solve a problem that really there's not one answer to. And so when you look at circularity, when you look at reducing the amount of waste that gets into our environments from textiles, textile to textile recycling is one path. That is a path that allows you to, at the end of life, you can take that garment, you can return it through a system, you can recycle it, you can turn that garment back into a yarn or fiber and make new garments out of it. That's a great method. You have that's a great method for things you can put your hands on. But unfortunately, during the life of that garment, during the manufacturing of that garment, microplastics leak out, again, using that term one more time, but microplastics get into the environment, and we can't put our hands on those. You don't see them, they're in. That's what we're addressing. So really a great combination, and what we're trying to convey to a lot of our customers now is, don't look at it as I'm only doing textile to textile. look at it as I'm trying to create a better polyester or a better synthetic material that at the end of life, it can be recycled. So that's textile to textile, but you can also have a technology in it that what can't be recycled, what leaks into the environment won't persist in the environment.
Right.
We work very well. We're with all of the textile to textile recyclers. CiCLO, the technology itself can be combined with, can go through textile recycling, whether it's thermomechanical, mechanical, or chemical, and it does not impede the ability of that textile to be recycled. Sure. We're almost like a safety net to say, okay, you're going to be able to recycle this, but if something gets into the environment that you can't get your hands on, it's not going to persist in the environment.
Yeah,
and you know, so that's what we're really trying to convey to our customers is there's not one answer, and you have to look at this problem holistically and say, if I'm addressing a textile waste problem, let's look at the whole problem and not just look at a part of the problem.
So that makes complete sense. And, you know, we have this apparel focus, of course, right? Mm-hmm. But your background and experience and what Parkdale, you mentioned the two, Parkdale and Intrinsic, mm-hmm. are involved in is not just apparel, right? Like you're I made a note here, home textiles, contract fabrics. I mean, are you also going into like the rug business? I mean, is that there's polyester rugs and
absolutely. And the interesting thing when you look at our technology, Rick, one of the interesting things, really, where we saw the initial growth was in the home market. Sheeting, towels, bath rugs, things like that. We still see that as a market that not only looked at this technology first and said, this is something we need to adopt and we need to implement into our programs, but they're continuing to look at areas to expand into those areas. And, you know, so you have the home market. You mentioned, you know, again, sheets, towels, rugs, the hospitality market. Obviously, that's an area because not only it's the same, you know, market as the home market, but the amount of washing and the actual aggressiveness of that washing that you get, it, you know, that can very easily release more microfibers, microplastics. So that's an area of growth that we really saw first, and we still see a very strong area. But outside of that, we're really looking into anywhere where synthetic textiles are today. So obviously the home market, obviously the contract market, you know, that's an area. The contract market, when you look at sustainability, they've always been really a leader in that sustainability space. It was they were one of the first really areas of the textile market to say we're going to adopt recycled polyester. Because, you know, they see it, they want to do things like that. So we're seeing some interest in that market, and you know, now it's exploration. Obviously, an area that I'm focused on, and you mentioned it, is apparel. And what we're trying to do is really grow that apparel market. Truth be told, it's a little slower than the home market because the apparel market, as we all know, it's very complex. You know, the home market, you don't have as many seasons. They're not as many, you know, things run for such longer programs, where the apparel market is it's in 1 minute, it's out the next. So, you know, but we are really starting to see some growth there. And you know, I mentioned those high shedding fabrics like fleece fabrics and things like that. That's the area that people tend to go to first, but we're starting to see it, you know, in swimwear, in you know, a lot of other areas. And then, you know, you mentioned the uniform market. I mean, our technology was born out of the uniform market. You know, our
why don't you tell that little story of?
Yeah, I mean, our co-founders actually supply into the uniform market. And I mean, behind me right here, this is the apron for McDonald's, and this apron is actually supplied by our co-founders, and it contains CiCLO. So those are the things that we continue to really try to educate, because microfibers and microplastics, they leak out of all textiles. They're not saying I'm just going to leak out of apparel. They're going to, they're everywhere. So we've got to look at how do we solve the problem everywhere.
But going back to the McDonald's reference, that's my understanding from Andrea, and that's where the idea was born, was from the McDonald's program.
Exactly.
A company called Way to Be, great company, member of the NAUMD, and they worked with McDonald's on this, on this solution, and then rightfully so said, well, we really should take this to the rest of the world, in essence, I guess, right?
It's exactly right. And again, they saw a problem, and they said, how do we address this problem? We have a customer that's interested. And then, like any good technology, you don't want to keep that technology to yourself. You want to make sure that if it solves the problem, let's solve the problem for everyone, and not just try to be, in one little area.
So how does a company go about evaluating, for sustainability purposes, what technology to place priority on? So McDonald's, it's almost like, because we're talking about an end user of our products, right? So we go to our companies that we work with and we say, well, we know you have this ESG. If they're a public company, they've got a very defined ESG initiative, typically, or mission. We see from these points, or you're asking us for end of life solutions. So where does a company, I mean, there's those days, Chad, when you're glad you do what you do for a living instead of what other people have to do, right? So, I don't envy the uniform company that has to offer up end of life solutions, because there's good, better, best. There's, no cost, inexpensive, or if we're going to do it right, we're adding $2 per garment, which is going to drive everyone nuts, right? So it's like, and I'm making up the $2 thing. I'm
right. Yeah, it is a hard choice, and I think and I've been in the sustainability space for close to 20, 25 years now, and what I always tell people is, don't get, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Look at the low hanging fruit. What you can do easily, get some wins. I would say when you look at what's coming down the road, what really is going to drive decision making in the next 5 to 10 years, it's probably going to be some of the legislations that we see, and SB 707 in California. We've seen the EPA and HHS have added microplastics to their contaminant candidate list. The state of California has added microplastics to their toxic substance control list. And what does this do? Well, what this does, this basically, it is starting to put steps in place that you can monitor and possibly regulate microplastics in things like our drinking water. So as these legislations start to come into place, the brands and retailers are going to have to start looking at, okay, what can I do to address these laws that are now being that are now being faced with, in the states, and globally, but just in the U.S. obviously. And you need to make sure that you're monitoring what is happening at the state and the local, the state, and the national level, so that you can then create your textiles to be compliant with whatever those laws are. And I think recycling, using recycled materials, the ability for the product to be recycled, all those are kind of the forefront that everybody sees now. But microplastics and what we're seeing, with this continued and increasing level of importance, and what we're really seeing is it's starting to hit the mainstream. And when it hits the mainstream and as it starts being added to these lists, you're going to start seeing regulations specifically mentioning it. So you're going to have to start figuring out ways to address it.
So is Europe or other parts of the world further ahead of us because of their interest in a stronger public-private regulation scheme?
They are. I mean, Europe is, in the world of sustainability, Europe tends to be slightly ahead of us. And they are, to a degree. They have some bills that are not in place yet, but they're moving forward, probably a little ahead of bills like SB 707 that California is working on now. So typically Europe does lead a little bit, and we are very, we work very closely with a lot of brands, and we have uniform brands that in Europe now, like Rafa is one that we work with today that uses CiCLO. And, again, so they're kind of looking at it like, hey, we see things that are starting to happen. So instead of waiting for them to happen and then being reactionary, we're trying to get ahead of the game and build products that would meet the requirements that we know are coming.
Right. So, I mean, the stick versus the carrot versus the moral obligation, if you will, versus the right. I mean, there's so many factors, and of course, just the capitalism involved, right? The literal, capital required either to develop, to include, to run a program with these elements included. And what are we learning from the companies so far, Chad, that have incorporated in the U? I know several, in the U.S. that are using the additive as well. So, I mean, are there? Put your sales hat, on for a second. Say, well, here's what those companies are reporting, right? I mean, I want to talk in an educational manner, but is there something we're learning from the companies that are using it?
Yeah, and I would say that the biggest aha moment that a lot of the companies that we work with today are seeing is that integrating it into the supply chain is relatively simple. Again, we're an additive, so we are very early in that supply chain, and we have over 45 fiber and yarn partners that we work with today that are global supplied. So we work very closely with all of them. We make sure that the technology is available globally, but really getting it into the supply chain is relatively simple. And again, I won't get into cost here because obviously cost, but it's not. The other aha moment is it's really not that much more expensive. One of the big things that our customers do really like about our product is our traceability. And traceability is something that is key and is becoming more and more required, by the brands. And we actually have an embedded tracer in our technology, so we can test the product, whether it's at the fiber level, at the yarn level, at the fabric level, or even at the end of garment level, and tell you whether or not it contains CiCLO. That is something that our brands really they love and they really require, because obviously when you're making claims about reduction of microplastics. Those you've got to be able to stand behind those claims, and you've got to know that the technology is in the product so that you feel comfortable about making the claims.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing. And I think for us, from an education standpoint, obviously one of the things that we're trying to do is continue to educate, because and you mentioned it, biodegradable or biodegradable technologies, it's not something simple to explain right now. It's not something that is easily explained. And unfortunately, it's not something that you can directly say on a garment, because our the FTC, that when you get into the labeling laws, they currently are not allowing you to call out something to be biodegradable unless it biodegrades in under 180 days. Well, cotton doesn't biodegrade in under 180 days. And it's a natural fiber. So those laws that are currently being held, or that we're currently being held to in terms of labeling, those laws were designed in packaging and things like that, where they weren't designed for textiles. So, obviously telling the story, it is a little harder story to tell right now. And I think that's one of the probably hurdles that we're trying to get over. But, we're actively working with groups to hopefully, get that addressed and maybe get some changes done in that arena.
So what's the future then? I mean, won't AI, Chad, just come up with a new way of doing all of this for us in the next few years that, we didn't even think of, being the smart humans we are? I mean,
it's a good question. And AI is, I would say the future. It's hard for me to say what AI is going to do in the future. Obviously,
of course. AI, I was teasing.
AI is impact. Yeah, I know. I was like, Rick, you didn't send me that question. I wasn't ready for that one. But I do think what I think the future is from a microplastic standpoint. I think the future is there's going to be more and more focus on microplastics, because people, organizations, governments are seeing that microplastics are an issue to the textile waste problem that we have. So there's going to be more focus on that. I would say that, is there a perfect world where we're all going to be, this problem is going to go away? Synthetic textiles is not going to go away. So what we have to do is, how do we make better synthetic textiles that are still durable, that still perform exactly like what we want them to perform like, but when they get into an environment as a pollution, or a pollutant, then they don't stay in that environment. So I would say the future is going to be a lot more focus. I would say that with these bills and as these to come online, could you see fees and things like that are added to textiles that don't address this problem? Absolutely. So again, and I'll put my sales hat back on. It's like, my point being is, don't wait to be asked to do something. Go ahead and get ahead of it and say, what are some solutions that I can really look at and look to do to solve problems? Because I know I may not be solving the problem for myself, but I'm solving the problem for my kid, or I'm solving the problem for my grandchildren.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, one of the ways I look at these Uniformer episodes is, did I learn something on them? And I did, Chad. So I only assume that our listeners have learned something as well. Where do they get more info? What's the website?
Sure. Website is CiCLOTechnology.com. And then, I'm on LinkedIn and under Chad Bolick. They can reach out to me direct. And I'm sure.
Yeah, and here at the NAUMD, if people want to reach out to me, I'll connect them with Chad. And Chad, it was a pleasure. Thank you for breaking down the tech and, some of the chemical and science into terms that, even I can understand. And so it's very helpful.
Yeah, well, Rick, it's always a pleasure seeing you, and I hope to see you again very soon. And
likewise,
I hope you're staying cool, because in North Carolina it is a muggy mess right now. So
we have a lot of moisture, which I could deal with, but the mosquitoes I'm getting a little sick of.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.